about diabetes, type 2 diabetes to be specific. And we are facing an epidemic on an incredible scale. A couple of figures for you. In the United States of America, this is the adult population of the United States, 50% are either pre-diabetic or diabetic. Another 10 to 15% or so are actually already insulin resistant, so they're heading in that direction towards diabetes unless they do something about it. It's extraordinary numbers, and I'm sure that Europe is much the same, and the developing world is catching us up fast because they're adopting our sort of lifestyles. Hello, my name is Graham Keegan, and I'm interested in helping you deal with diabetes. I can help you here because I've been overweight and had diabetes, but have got past both those things. On my BMI is back within the healthy area, and I am in diabetic remission. So I've done this for myself. I know what works, I know what doesn't work, and I can help you too. Diabetes essentially is caused by the fact that our bodies, our metabolisms, however we want to describe it, are simply overwhelmed by sugar. That's what's happening. And this is a problem which has crept up on us all over the last 40 years or so. And this is because that we now eat far more in the way of pre-manufactured foods, prepared foods from the shops and supermarkets, and these typically are full of carbohydrates and added sugars, and that's our problem. And you have to combine with this the fact that we do so much less exercise now as well, so we've got two things which are going very wrong for us. Because if you compare how we live now, if we go back to our ancient hunter-gatherer ancestors, they would have had to walk a lot of miles every day to hunt and gather their food, and what they're eating was very much natural food, probably a lot of meat, fish, and also vegetables as well. And so you compare to what they were doing to how we live our lifestyles. We now get our food after sitting in a desk all day long. We drive home and pop into a takeaway on the way, maybe even a drive-through, so we don't even get out the car. And we're eating then poor quality processed foods. So it's these the processed foods, because they contain so much carbohydrate, which is our problem. Because the carbohydrate, forgive me if I don't want to teach you to suck eggs here, is obviously sugars. And all carbohydrates are sugars. They may be complex sugars or simple sugars, but they're all sugars. And the complexity of them varies how fast they actually release into the blood system. Because the carbohydrate, as I say, is full of sugar, and that is turned into glucose into the blood system, and then the blood has to deal with that and store that in the cells. And what the body does is that insulin is released by the pancreas. The pancreas detects the fact there's a lot more glucose, sugar, in the bloodstream, and it releases insulin, whose role is to act like a chemical key to unlock the cells to tell them to take in and to glucose out of the bloodstream. Now, that system works fine, but if you continually keep overloading the system with lots of sugar, lots of carbohydrate, and that's what we're doing, more insulin has to be released, and yet more has to be released to try to deal with it. And over time, and that could be years, maybe even a decade or so, the body can't cope anymore, and and your blood sugar is permanently raised, and you become what's called insulin resistant. The cells don't respond to the insulin any longer. Then if it carries on, then you move into what's called a pre-diabetic state, and then a diabetic state, and when your blood sugar is constantly above what it should be. And that has some serious, very serious metabolic health issues, which we can't deal with today. We can't deal with everything. We'll come back to that another time, another video. What insulin does, for the 300,000 years or so that humans have been on the planet, insulin has worked fantastically well. It does a great job, but it really struggles to deal with the situation when there's very little exercise going on, so the blood sugar is building up, and also we're taking in so much sugar in the first place. So its system of what it does is three things. Well, these things, as you'll see, work against us these days, because what it does, it actually stores fat. That's when insulin is released. It triggers the storage of fat. It slows the metabolism as well, and finally, it makes us feel hungry. So you've got storing of fat, slowing the metabolism, and making us feel hungry. So you can see when we're overloading with carbohydrates, insulin is then doing this and effectively making the problem worse, which we've got. And so we have to think about, well, how do we get out of this? Well, I think the crucial thing to pick up from all this is the fact that insulin is in control of the system. And it is the case that if you become overweight for whatever reason, there's a variety of reasons why we can all become overweight. This is when insulin is then start causing this issue of storing fat, slowing the metabolism, and making us feel hungry. And so once you're in a situation of being overweight with raised insulin constantly, the insulin will actually make the problem worse. So it's not overeating that causes us to become fat, overweight. It's being overweight, and then that gets made worse by the insulin. So once you're overweight and without insulin under control, it's very, very difficult to get yourself back within a standard weight range. But the great news is, if you get your insulin under control, then your weight will normalize over time. It won't be overnight, but it will normalize. Insulin runs the show. Insulin's in control. So let's just talk about some of the three main macronutrients and just go through briefly how they affect us, because the effect is very different. And again, there's big help here when we understand this. The three macronutrients are fat, protein, and carbohydrate. As we said, the carbohydrate is the one with all the sugars in. And the body deals with these three macronutrients very differently. Fat is stored as fat. Very straightforward. That's what it is. And importantly, this fat does not spike your insulin. It doesn't spike your insulin, and that's crucial. That's really crucial. Protein, that is broken down to amino acids, essential building blocks for our bodies, and excess protein becomes glucose. It's turned into sugar. It causes you that insulin problem. That's but only excessive amounts of protein. And then finally, carbohydrate. Well, there are three types of carbohydrate: unrefined, refined, and sugars. But they all contain sugars and starches, and so they all have an effect on us, and that is to raise our blood sugar levels, which causes the insulin then to spike. So on that basis, you can see there's a healthy diet plan which we should be adopting. And increasingly, a lot of research now supports this. And it was something very unfashionable, or not supported at all, only going back about 20 or 30 years. Because we've been told for that time that we must eat a lot of carbohydrate. And you can see this experiment, worldwide experiment about telling us all to eat carbohydrate, has failed really badly. The fact that so many of us now are overweight and so many of us are diabetic. So let's have a rethink about this. And I would suggest to you this. By food group, we eat a lot of healthy fats. Now, not all fats are healthy, but a lot of natural fats are healthy. So we eat a lot of healthy fats. And so I'm talking about oily fish, salmon, mackerel, sardines, avocados, nuts, olive oils. These are all good for us, and obviously meat as well is in there too. And then we need to eat a moderate amount of protein. So again, that's meats, fish, and seafood. And then finally, we eat a low amount of carbohydrate. So whether it's unrefined carbohydrate, like wholemeal bread, or refined carbohydrates like white bread and biscuits and cakes and things, or just straight sugar, like sugar on donuts, these are things we should be avoiding. Yes, unrefined carbohydrates in wholemeal bread releases sugar into the system slower than refined carbohydrates, but it's still releasing sugar into our system. It's not the great panacea to our health that some people make out. So a diet high in fats, moderate in protein, low in carbohydrate. And if you are overweight, not only should you be eating a low amount of carbohydrate, I think that should be a very low amount of carbohydrate. And if you are in a diabetic state, struggling with diabetic disease, then it should be a very, very low amount of carbohydrate. Eat plenty of green veg, that's always good for us. And also I'd say to you, don't be hungry as well. When you develop a diet for yourself, work this high, medium, low approach, but eat plenty of green veg. And if I was to say something, to put it in a very simple way, rather than remembering all the technical terms of carbohydrate, protein, etc., just think about this: 3 foods to avoid. Avoid grains. For here in the UK, it's primarily wheat we eat. That's the one we need to avoid. Avoid wheat, but avoid grains generally. Avoid sugar, donuts, sugar in your tea, sugar in cake, sugar in biscuits, wherever it might be. And also, finally, avoid potato, because I know it's a natural vegetable, but it's full of starch, which is a sugar. Some things I've learned over the last few years, which I wish I knew several years ago, because it made a big difference. And perhaps I would have got myself into the lack of good health state I got myself into, which I now have got out of, is this point about how controlling insulins means your weight is under control. It has lots of other knock-on metabolic benefits. Control of insulin is crucial. Eat healthy fats. We've been told for 40 years or so not to do that, but fats are very good for us. And they don't spike your insulin. And cutting right down on wheat was the best thing I did several years ago. I do recommend that. Cut down on the wheat. You'll feel so much better. It certainly had the effect of me and making me feel bloated and drowsy and hungry. Cut down on the wheat. Try to avoid the processed foods, because they normally have extra sugars added to them, and they'll have lots of refined flour, which have no nutritional value at all. Avoid the light and low-fat foods, but that normally what they've done there, they reduce the amount of fat actually in the product, and they put the price up as well. But so avoid those, and eat natural foods if you can do, please. Eat foods which are fish from the sea, or grown in the ground, or fed on food grown in the ground. These sort of foods, natural foods, don't have labels, so that's a good starting point. If something you're going to buy doesn't have a label, that probably means it's pretty good for you. So that's covered diabetes in about 10 minutes or so, and there's an awful lot more to it. But it is a very serious issue. We have to deal with it, and we have to get ourselves out of this and back to good health. Now, just like to mention here that every Monday evening, 6 p.m. UK time, I do a live event on Zoom. You can register on that. I'll put a link to the registration to it in the link below. And we cover a different subject every week. I talk for about 10 minutes or so, and then you're free to ask questions of whatever you like. The whole event lasts for about 30 or 40 minutes. I think you'll find it useful. As I say, link will be below this video. That's all for today. I wish you good health. Talk to you again soon.